So hello, my name is Sfetkidis and I am an artist and the Feminist Emissary at the Queen Victoria Women's Centre. And we're here today in conversation with Hope Matumbu and Kate Sulan to talk about a project that I've been working on called the Women's COVID-19 Archive. Before I begin, I'd just like to acknowledge that we're gathered here today on the lands of the Wurundjeri and the Boonwurrung people of the Kulin Nation, and I'd like to pay my respects to elders past and present, and acknowledge that this land is still unceded and always was, always will be Aboriginal land. So I thought I'd just start by introducing the two panel members and then telling everyone here a little bit more about the project, and then we're just going to have a bit of a general conversation about sort of expansion of the project. So Hope is here, she's on my right, and Hope is a queer South African woman who's been living in Melbourne since 2003. She has a master's in public health and she's almost completed her nursing degree. Very soon, and she's also been sort of quite an avid contributor to radio and the arts, and her writing has also been published in Growing Up African in Australia. And Kate here on my left is a director, dramaturg, theatre maker and facilitator, and she is the founding director of Raucous, who are a theatre company, award-winning theatre company in fact, and they work with an ensemble of 15 people who are diverse in minds and bodies. And both Hope and Kate were participants in this project that I've been working on this year. So as I said, my name's Katie and I'm an artist. And yeah, this year I've been working on an archive collecting stories of women from across Victoria throughout the pandemic. And so I've sort of started the archive in April or May, I think. Time feels very strange these days. And I basically did an open call out and also contacted women from, across the state. So working in a range of different disciplines. So artists, health workers, teachers, people that are not working, women that work in art therapy, and also some younger people as well. And I've been sort of having ongoing conversations with a group of about 20 women from across the state throughout the year, and that has sort of culminated in a series of recorded conversations between me and those women that will form, I guess, an archive that will be housed at the Queen Victoria Women's Centre. And there's sort of a hope that next year, as sort of things start to ease up, that it will be made open to the public and people will actually be able to come and look at the archive. So, and I guess the idea for the archive kind of came out of, I guess like quite early on in the pandemic, I felt like women were being impacted by COVID in a really particular way. And a lot of the time, I didn't really feel like I was seeing those stories being reflected or represented in terms of what was happening in the mainstream media. So I wanted to, I guess, create a sort of adjacent sort of set of stories that people could go back to and look at in a time that's sort of really unique and unlike anything we'd ever experienced before. And so that's sort of how the project came about, and it's still ongoing. I'm still talking to people and collecting stories, and I'll probably be doing that for at least another few months. And it's been sort of quite interesting to see how, I guess, people have changed over that period of time, and people's, and it's been really nice to be able to check in with people over and over again. So it's really great that Hope and Kate could be here today, so I could check in with them again. So I just thought I would just open it up, maybe starting with you, Hope, if you wanted to talk a little bit about your experience of this year, I guess particularly studying and working in the health sector.
Yep. Yeah, thank you so much. Hi, everybody. Thanks to Queen Vic Women's Centre and M Pavilion for having us today and for this amazing project. Well, 2020 for me has been, as a mature age student, trying to get through a nursing degree. I wasn't eligible for any Centrelink or other supports. I don't live at home with my family. And essentially, to get a nursing degree, you need to do 800 hours of unpaid work. And so this was my final year, and a lot of it was doing, part of the component, aside from the academic work, is all of that unpaid placement, which was difficult because there were a lot of unanswered questions as to whether, what would happen to students if we contracted COVID, and all of the question marks that were around COVID were not answered by the university or other people, and different countries around the world sort of either fast-tracked students or decided to pay them, but Australia did none of that. And so doing that, and for work, sometimes I did work in hotel quarantine. I've done sort of work in pop-up testing, drive-through testing, until the government sort of kind of put a mandate that students couldn't do certain types of work two weeks prior to starting their unpaid placement, but still had no way of sort of paying us or kind of figuring out how we would get compensated. And so, and so, I mean, I have been lucky to work in other aspects of community healthcare, and it's an area that I really love, but it's been really interesting to have gone through such a profession that's about healthcare and well-being, and just being really tired and over it, at the end of it, and then also trying to keep up all this other, my interest in the arts and everything. I mean, I think that the relationship between the arts, health, and well-being, I mean, everybody always talks about it. People have been watching more Netflix, or, have been engaging with the arts in more ways than they ever have. And so also seeing an area that I love and think so highly of get so underfunded and cut. So it's been a tough year. And over to you, Kate.
I think that is an epic question. How has this year been? It's been epic, and I feel like it's been there's phases of the year. There's the first lockdown. There's that little bit in the middle where we all kind of thought we were coming out, and then there's the mega lockdown, and then there's now. I've never felt the tension between being a mother and a working person more profoundly than this year. And an artist, and I think it's been a real year of reckoning, really, to kind of work out how to do those things. And I parent a 15-year-old and a 10-year-old. Both my children are adopted, and in particular, my youngest child came to us as a 5-year-old. So initially, we've been working really hard for 5 years to work with her to go, the world's safe and predictable, and you're okay. And then she was really thrown by COVID, more than we had anticipated. So the initial phase was really just trying to bunker down, and it was really, I feel like we were all in a bit of survival mode, trying to just work out how to navigate and negotiate this very unsafe time, and a very frightened child who was very angry and didn't really understand. And the pandemic was my fault, which I felt very powerful. But, as time went by, we and that initial kind of really destabilising moment settled, then it was about working out how to homeschool and be an artist and continue to work and hold together a company in a very unusual way, Yeah.
Yeah, and I think like how to manage work, or like this idea of work, like with such like everybody sort of experienced like an upheaval to that in really different sense, I think. And it's but I think it's what's been sort of quite interesting actually talking to all the different people is everyone's experienced that in really different ways. Like I know for you, Hope, you sort of I was looking back through the conversation, you were sort of talking about how your work didn't feel like it changed very much, but there was this sort of background of the pandemic to but you were still going out sort of quite consistently during that period?
Yeah, definitely. Everybody, spoke about the lockdown. I mean, but in some ways it was a boom period for healthcare workers, even though we were on the front lines of something that is very dangerous. But one of the saving graces, I guess, is that I was out every day. I would see people, 3-4 times a week, and that would sort of be surreal as people are talking about, how to adapt the home office or do this or do that, and it's like I can't relate, and I'd just be tired all of the time. So if it wasn't unpaid placement, I was sort of doing community work and meeting people, different kinds of people, sort of every day, and having an experience that I guess the majority of people were not sort of talking about, and that was really strange, feeling tired in this way, and everybody wanting lockdown to end, and I'm sort of like, well, it's just different. It's not really, and I guess coming, everything coming out of it now, and it's like, well, I'm still tired. In some ways, lockdown was a good way to like not have the distraction of catching up with friends, because going back as a mature age student, it was really hard to juggle, going out with friends, because I used to work in public health, have a desk job and that sort of thing, and everybody wanted to go out, catch up for birthdays. So to be honest, it was kind of nice because it felt that like the world was on pause for me until I finished. And so as things started to open up and everyone's like, we haven't seen each other, it's like, no, I've seen enough people, don't call me. Don't come over. And so that's been really strange. Not that I'm not happy for all of us, and I'm not happy for everyone having this time to go out, but I think that the burnout for the workforce that is in healthcare, and healthcare never stops. It's a permanent job that you will have for as long as, touch wood, people aren't very sick, but for as long as people will need people to look after them, it's something that keeps going. And it's a very interesting thing because it's a big female-led profession, and there's been a lot of martyring, whether you talk about being on the front lines, whether, they want to honor us next year, but they're not going to pay us. And that's really weird, you have things around, like I talk about the martyring and the, turning us into like the new Anzacs, but we're not really seeing the kind of money and development going into healthcare as we see in terms of like military spending, for instance, So we've got one sort of lest we forget that's built with all these macho men that are pretty much the most feral people ever, drinking out of prosthetic legs. Sorry for anyone who this is triggering. And on the other side, we have a profession that's being seen as like, oh, wow, we did need healthcare workers. We did need you, all you fine, brave young ladies. But how are we going to thank these people? Definitely the federal government hasn't had any answers to that. The state government's done a little bit in recognizing healthcare. And this isn't just about us, I guess. I mean, the other thing for me was, I was spending lots of time, we didn't really have honest conversations with elderly people and immunocompromised people. I've got asthma myself, but being one of the few faces of elderly people that they saw, and we're trying to prolong someone's life maybe 1 or 2 more years, and all they ever wanted was to see the grandkids or their children, and they're like, yeah, COVID, I don't mind getting it if it means at least seeing my grandchild or this or that. And we didn't really have lots of honest conversations, I think, about quality of life. We have lots of conversations about prolonging life, but when we see the same elderly people presenting to a hospital, then it's sort of like a shuffle of who gets a ventilator. But there's some people who are like, well, I would like people in my house. If I don't have that much longer anyway, I would like them in my house. So sometimes I'd feel very sad that I was out, 2-3 times a week, seeing all these people who are like, well, it's just you again. Where's my grandchild? Where's my son? Where's my daughter? Lots of anniversaries, lots of birthdays that people missed without a choice, without having an honest conversation. It was like, everybody will do this in this way. And parts of that were also unfair. Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like on one hand, there's this sort of I can kind of see big picture why the government wanted to like create laws that were very understandable and clear. But I think this is like lack of nuance then like left so many people out of the sort of picture. I mean, I think particularly aged care and, people that suddenly like can't see their families for a really long time. And yeah, I guess this was that weird balance where like sometimes I feel like there needed to be nuance and there wasn't.
Yeah, definitely.
And yeah, I guess like Kate, I guess for you, like working must have been like also really different because I guess you went from probably having many plans to doing something very different.
Yeah, I think I'm not unlike many artists who that weekend of the 13th of March, over kind of 3 days, really everything that we had in plan and in place just kind of got cancelled and I know that was a very similar 3 days for many, many artists where you just kind of watched the year's plans go. But, I understood why and that was just what had to happen but it was devastating at the same time. I think what was interesting, I work with a company called Raucous, which is a long-term ensemble-based company, and there's 15 performers. Some identify as having a disability, some don't. And what I feel like happened is the cracks that were already there, any cracks that they were kind of bubbling away under the surface, COVID really brought to the fore. They did that internally in my family, or the cracks that were there for my children kind of got exposed, and same for the ensemble that I work with. So we are a very connected ensemble. We're a long-term ensemble. We work together every week. And suddenly I could not find half my ensemble. They disappeared because they live in supported accommodation or I just could not find them. So it took a while to find everyone. And then, people were going, just get online. But that for this company with people with very different access to technology, knowledge of technology, ability to work with technology, it took us a long time to find people, get them equipment, get them the skills, get them training to be able to then meet together on Zoom. And it was a long time. It took over a month of really hard work and a lot of support. But we got there, and then we had to work out how to adapt a process that's really based on connection, on touch, on energy exchange between people in a room. How does that work online? And so that was a big process of working out how to do that and how to maintain an ensemble practice, let alone a creative practice, on a really, really different medium.
Yeah, and I think that that rush to like go digital, for want of a better way, is like I don't know, to me there's some sort of link between like this sort of rush to just like find a solution really quickly that's sort of similar to what you were talking about in terms of like people not having access to aged care or their family. It's just like there was just like this continual rush to like find a solution to something like that. And I think like sometimes that meant that people were missed out, or that there wasn't, I think digital access in particular, like there are definitely people I was speaking to in Geelong who were talking about the fact that there were lots of kids in that area that didn't have the internet, so suddenly couldn't do homeschooling. And so there were people that worked in the community there that were sitting outside kids' houses with their phone hotspot on so that the kids could tether to their phones so that they could do their homework. And, I think that if anything, the pandemic sort of has brought up these like cracks in the sort of, I guess, in lots of different sort of structures, both personally and also, on a sort of bigger, on societally as well. And yeah, I was wondering, Kate, if you could talk a little bit more about the thing that you ended up doing with Raucous.
Yeah, sure. So, one of the, I think this time has had really significant challenges, but also really significant gifts and opportunities. And one thing that did happen for us as a company is we kind of really thought about why do we do this, and what is our purpose, and what can we do. And I was reading a beautiful article by Anna Goldsworthy in The Monthly, who's a concert pianist, and she spoke about missing performance, but then she spoke about this moment where a friend of hers was very unwell and very sad, and she sat down and recorded on her iPhone a piece of music for her friend and sent it to her on her iPhone. And she said it wasn't, concerts sound quality, and it wasn't on the most beautiful piano ever, but it reminded her of what brought her to music in the first place, and this act of reminding people that we're not alone, and that art as a gift and a moment of generosity. So as a company, we started to think about what is it that what's sustaining us during this time, and how can we share that with people? So one of the things that we were doing is we were dancing together and getting a lot of joy from dancing together online. And so we just thought about offering a 20-minute dance break in the middle of the day to people. We called it Dance It Out. And the idea was that you'd come, it was at 12 o'clock, it would be 20 minutes, you'd come and you'd dance with us. We'd lead a dance session online. And it just went off. We were just so surprised at what happened. And so we had to upgrade our Zoom account to have more than 500 people on, so people, it just took off. And what this beautiful sense of community, all sorts of people from all around Victoria, and some from interstate and international as well, joined us for this beautiful community dance where we led a dance session and we danced together. And it was really, really spectacular, and one of the most, it was just a really moving and beautiful thing. And then we started to think about other things that we could do for people. So we had conversations with people about things that they were grappling with and are missing. And from that conversation, we would create images, and we worked with photographer Pia, who would create an image, and we did a lot on Zoom, and then we did some in real life when we got there, and we'd take an image of what they felt that they needed, and then we'd send it to them in the post. So we started to make these little offers of art as a connector and as a gift.
And they really were it was such a extraordinary thing to participate in. So I went to two of them, and I think I'm getting emotional now. I feel like there was such at the time, I just the first time I did it, I was just so overwhelmed with emotion. And I think it was just I hadn't been in a space with a lot of people for so long. And, and I hadn't really communicated with anyone sort of beyond maybe my work colleagues or my partner or my family. And so it just, it was very a really special thing to do, I think.
Yeah, thanks. And what I think was so beautiful about it is that people were seeking joy in this time that was really challenging and sharing joy with each other in this. And I just felt like people were really, really showing up for something, in that time, despite everything. And you could see kids and computers and homeschooling and pets and, it was just really a beautiful moment.
Yeah, and I think that something about that craving of connection with other people that were going through something very similar at the same time was sort of quite important. And I guess sort of maybe we'll use that as a little segue for my next sort of little question. But because a lot of the conversations I've been having, people have talked about how challenging it's been to then have to communicate or find relationships with family who are not here. And I know both of you have family that don't live in Melbourne. So I was wondering Hope, maybe you want to talk a bit about that?
Yeah. So I guess with, my family is sort of all over the place. I was born in South Africa, but we moved here with my mother and my younger sister. So my mum is 64 and she's a nurse. We moved here because she's a nurse, and she's still nursing. But I don't know where she was. Maybe she was in Tamworth or somewhere else, but she was interstate working. And we were like, look, if you can get your contract extended, don't come back. And so she was just still working, and we're like, well, hopefully, COVID won't sort of spread as much as it has in other countries, and thank goodness it hadn't. And my younger sister is a radiographer in Mulgrave, and so it was really interesting, the trio of us sort of being on the front line, separate but connected in this frontline way, if you will. And then I've got my older sister, my dad, and my nephew in South Africa, which was really interesting because South Africa, I guess, is the epicenter of the pandemic on the continent. But Dad is fine. He was always fine. I mean, unless it sort of spread into the Kruger National Park, he's just not retiring the way that he thought he would. But he's remote enough that I wasn't very worried about him, unless, the government did something silly. It is also tourism that makes a lot of money. So, I think being on the whims, I mean, seeing things like in a personal sense, being like, okay, they're all fine, but things could change in a systematic way where all of a sudden the exposure could sort of go up. And definitely, like in terms of South Africa, it's a lot of the tourist areas where COVID has sort of like sprung up and spread quite a lot. But where he is, it's still been really fine. And my older sister, unfortunately, South African Airways sort of went bust, the national airline. And so she kind of went from having a job to not having a job. And that was really difficult. So you're just worried about a lot of things around the pandemic, economic things. And she's a single mother as well. So that's been a big worry as well. And I think it's just been really interesting, I guess, when the Ring of Steel went down and that sort of thing, still really couldn't see family because we all worked in high-risk environments. And I still would say to friends, look, I'm still doing placement or this thing is still happening. You guys can go out and celebrate, but I'm still technically on the front lines where, the biggest exposure could happen. And sometimes people didn't really understand that and sort of having to be the responsible one and sort of say, I'm on the front lines. Maybe you guys go out, catch up. I've been to so many places that I can't count. So your relationships sort of change in that way, and that you sort of have to put yourself out of certain catch-ups or certain things until you've sort of passed the 14-day mark, or sort of say, well, I definitely probably don't have COVID now, or this is when placement ended. So having that sort of mindset, whereas I guess other people maybe wouldn't because they were all, at home, pretty much effectively. But I think one of the most interesting things as well is just been thinking about international students, I guess, and people who have even less families and kind of being friends with migrant women, where it's sort of like, well, I guess now everybody's happy because they can catch up with family for Christmas. But for a lot of us, flying back home or people flying here to see us, who knows when that's ever going to happen or how much it will cost. I mean, it was already sort of really expensive to fly to South Africa, and then we got a discount, but there's no more discounts now. I'm going to have to really save all that money. And so I don't know when I'll see my nephew again, my dad, my older sister, no idea when that will happen. And I think there's quite a lot of people where it's like, okay, now is supposed to be the family time. We can all go out and see each other. And there's a lot of people who live in this country that have never had anyone. And I think there's also a lot of people who are worrying. I mean, I just caught up with a few friends. A friend of mine who's Ethiopian American, and everything that's happening in Ethiopia and everything that's happening in the US is sort of like this double burden for her. And that's really interesting as well, because I guess in some ways the world has kept spinning, and there's that reality as well, is like, and just us talking before this panel, went down to East Brunswick and all the shop fronts have changed, and it's like, wow, the world kept spinning, and the construction industry is one of the industries that haven't stopped. And so for a lot of us, you're walking down the street for the first time, it's like, oh, there used to be a house there, it's not there anymore. And literally things have changed while you've been indoors, like shop fronts and things. And so it's weird, that disconnect of like, things have kept going, but to see that actual physical change in the environment and not really have anyone to be with as well. So, shout out to all the people on temporary visas who sort of toughed it out, and I don't know, don't really have anyone. I'm sorry. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that, what you're saying about things changing is so weird. Like I didn't go to my studio for a few months, and then the next time I went, the building next door was completely demolished, and like it was just like such a strange experience to turn down the street and be like, what? But I do think like, I think about people who are on temporary visas and international students and people that really like, I mean, I feel like very, very lucky. Like I've been on JobKeeper the whole time, and it's made like a huge difference. But I know like lots of artists and like basically anyone who's not an Australian citizen is like not, like just was kind of forgotten in a lot of ways, I think. And also is like so conscious and so worried about their visa that they also like are not in a position to want to speak out about it either, which I think, it just makes it a really sort of tricky situation, I think.
Yeah, and I was reading, I think it was an article in The Guardian about last week or, a fortnight ago, and it was just talking about violence against women. And there was 3 international students that were covered in this piece, but 2 out of 3 of them were nursing students. So international students who are also studying nursing. And so I've really felt this strangeness about being in a career where, you know, when we talk about people on the front lines, we hardly ever think about nursing students and all of that unpaid labor just to get the degree. And many of us are working in healthcare already for the experience and that sort of thing. And, you know, just reading that article, I just felt a lot, you know, just thinking about these young women. And one of them was, you know, a Brazilian student, 33, just a year older than I. So, you know, and she decided to tough it out and that sort of thing. And the violence against women that's kind of gone through the roof because people decided to stay put and sort of see what would happen later on because they didn't have any other choice. And when we don't talk about that or give support in women-led industries that are there to support people and not just nursing, but social work and all of these things that we sort of thought were like a bit woo-woo, but, you know, I'm really disappointed in the professions that are about caring and the lack of caring that has happened for the workers that go through them, because it's sort of expected that you're some sort of robot that, you know, what's this medication? What does it do? And I have stress-induced gastritis. I had to put aside an appointment at the Joan Kerner Women's Hospital for, you know, to look into my cervix for ongoing issues. I've got asthma, and so I had to go to the doctor and kind of get my asthma plan. And it's like my body as well, and many people's bodies, I think, have, you know, either acute things that have popped up or ongoing things where you can actually tell, you know, I know the medications that I'm on, the medications that I had to go on because it was stressful to go through this. And the unions are like, all right, so you'll be fine, you'll be fine. And you know, it's interesting now that you can name it as a nurse and be like, this is the medication that I'm on, but it's really sad that we had to get to that point and all of this stuff had to be born out of stress. But, you know, it's also touch wood that, you know, somebody didn't kill me because I was in a really bad relationship and couldn't get out of it. So it's a really weird thing that I'm trying to come to terms with overall.
And I think, yeah, I've spoken to a number of people from the archive that are in various stages of family violence situations, and you know, there's such a disconnect between the kind of support that they were able to access in this time. One of the ladies that I was talking to, you know, she couldn't have a support worker at her court case, but her perpetrator could have his lawyers there, and you know, I guess it goes back to that sort of arbitrariness of like what was decided was okay and what wasn't, and like why those decisions were being made, I think. And because, you know, I also the same day spoke to an art therapist who was able to continue her practice with her clients throughout the entire lockdown in her studio, which is incredible. But it was like, why is that person allowed to have face-to-face contact and then this other person who really need it not allowed? Like, yeah. And I feel like, yeah, I guess it's sort of brought up a lot of, I guess we'll go back to what you were saying, Kate, like these cracks or like structural inequalities seem to, even if they're not changing, there seems to be a space for people to be able to discuss them in a way that maybe there wasn't before. Yeah. Sorry, family. I feel like we really progressed onto a different path. But
I mean, I've also been thinking about people who can't see their family at the moment. And, you know, I know that moment, my family are all interstate as well, and my partner's family. And the moment when the borders were closed, most of my family in South Australia, was a really, really emotional moment. We didn't know how long that would be for, but just the feeling that we couldn't get to them. And so I've really extended that feeling for people, and it's particularly at this time, I think as well. It's very... And so I haven't seen my family for a year. But I also think there's a real disconnect, because I think if you haven't lived in Victoria in this time, it's very, very hard to understand what lockdown has meant and what it's felt like and what it's been like. And so it does feel like most of my family have kind of managed to live pretty much the same way that they've been living. You know, they had a few weeks of homeschooling and a few weeks of lockdown, but essentially their lives are pretty much the same. And so there's just been a real disconnect in not through lack of them wanting to understand, they just haven't been able to understand. And that's been it's been hard and a bit isolating, I think, as well. But I also really relate to what you were saying, Hope, about my body feels like it's carrying the year inside itself. And even though things have opened up and things are changing, I really can still feel the year in my body and in my system and in my... so it just doesn't feel over at all. It feels very present still.
And I think part of that too is like, I guess, coming out of lockdown, like relearning how to be in the world, which is definitely something that, I was just saying to both of you before, like I just went to a rehearsal room for the first time and it was like after 2 hours, I was just like, I'm exhausted. Like I just need to go home and have a sleep. And so I was wondering if maybe you wanted to speak to like what it's been like, I guess, sort of now that we're in this sort of other phase of like coming out of lockdown.
Well, I will talk about a funnier thing. I'm really looking forward to camping and challenging myself because, I mean, things opened up. People invited me to a few places. I was like, I hate it here. And I've always resisted elements of camping. I'm more glamping adjacent, I would say. But look, my partner's gotten so many wins. The other day we went to BCF and got one of those portable toilets because we're going to a place, like there's an Airbnb, but it's for camping. I forget what it's called, but it's like the Airbnb for camping. And apparently you can't use a trowel on people's actual land. So you got to like do your business and carry it away with you. And never would I've ever been convinced to do this, but we're going ahead, baby. And I'm looking so forward to it. And I think that connection with nature. And I might even get like a little bodyboard. I'm afraid of the ocean, but maybe no more.
Do it.
I'm looking so forward to just getting out of here. I'm really looking forward to it. And I think reconnecting with the natural. I mean, because I think lockdown happened, things opened up, and everybody's still consumerist. And I feel like there's a lot of lessons that we haven't really learned very well. And I'm finally ready to like let go. And I'm finally ready to go remote. I mean, somebody needs to teach me how to fish. I was there in BCF and I was like, I wish I knew how to fish. I was going on YouTube. I'm like, it's too soon. But I'd really like to learn how to fish and do a few more natural things. And I think appreciation of the future and appreciation of natural things that I thought I was afraid of. But I can't wait. Sorry, I don't know if that answers the question, but I just can't wait. And everything in this city, I mean, and no offense, everything has just sort of gotten me a bit annoyed. And even with things having reopened, like I'm happy for everybody else, but I think that I haven't had my escape yet. And I can't wait to get out of here. Yeah.
I mean, I've escaped like as soon as I could. I went to the beach for 3 days and I feel like it was very I needed it, like just to be, even though I still was like on a Zoom meeting and I was like, this isn't as relaxing as I thought it was going to be. Like,
I'm with you. I haven't done my escape yet, but I'm looking forward to it. But in a way, you know, when my children went back to school, it was like bliss. It was seriously bliss. You know, it's like I just want to sit on my couch and just not watch my house get trashed and, you know, not have to attend to homeschooling and all the food prep and all of, you know. But I during lockdown, I live, the Mary Creek is just on the end of my street. And it was such a sustaining and nourishing place for me in lockdown, you know, to walk that creek. And again, similar to you, like nature just feels like the balm. And I just really want to be in the ocean and, you know, tossed around by some waves and, pummeled by some waves, actually. I really feel like I want to, I'm looking for nature as well to kind of help process this year.
In some ways, it's kind of being freeing. Like I've the permission to just be like. I mean, that realization that we really don't have any control. You know, systems, everything, and it's good to be an activist and to be whatever. But and sometimes I used to think about self-care as sort of like this. like, yes, it's good, you know, we talk about it, but like I wasn't very good at doing it and performing it and taking it easy on myself. And I think like I really believe that I'm ready to give myself a break. Whereas before you talk about it and like, yes, I'm going for a break. And, you know, sometimes people talk about sometimes holidays being more stressful. You know, sometimes you need a holiday from your holiday. And that was always how I did holidays. But now I'm ready to like be tossed around, like literally like this freedom and be like nothing, like in some ways it's kind of like I've been beaten down so much that I'm almost invincible. It's like, oh, I survived. I can survive. So I like throw myself in the ocean. Actually, everybody swim safe. It's actually a very dangerous time. The ocean's dangerous. It's actually during summer times and you can't tell the rips. Beach safety.
Once a healthcare worker, always a healthcare worker.
Like, I'm ready to sort of be thrown around a little bit in the safe areas, in between the flags.
Get pummeled safely, is that the message?
Yeah, no wonder too. Like oh God, I totally forgot what I was going to say. Yeah, like how, like I think this idea of self-care is like how, like I know for myself, like I was always like, I'm going to do like 20 million things. I'm like never going to sleep. And like, I was like, oh, actually sleeping 8 hours a day is like really good for you and like makes you feel kind of good. And like how, like, because I think self-care has been really important during this time. And it's like, how does that then like change our relationship to everything moving forward, I think, in a way. Like I particularly think of it like, I guess, being an artist, I feel like we're not very good at that and we always put a lot of pressure on ourselves and quite often we like take on, you know, too many projects that we don't really have time for, and I wonder if that expectation on ourselves will change.
I was just thinking about a project that we have done since we've been able to be out in the world. And, you know, there's this kind of thing that the show must go on, show must go on, show must go on despite everything. But now with COVID safety, if you have a tickle in your throat, the show cannot go on. You just like actually can't come. And so we were making a little film, and the key artist woke up the morning of the film shoot and said, I've got a sore throat and a snotty nose. And we're like, you can't come in. And it was just like the first time that in an arts project that I've been in where, and we worked out a way and we found a way forward, and he stayed home and he went and got tested and did all the things and all of our COVID safe procedures went through. But I was like, this is a myth. It's a myth that the show must always go on. And I think my greatest fear is that we've been afforded this big disruption, this moment to kind of look at some of these cracks that have been exposed to us. This systemic injustices have been really exposed to us in this time. Our relationship to productivity has been kind of really clearly shown to us, and how the pace and this kind of need to produce, and that we just go back to what it was would be my greatest sadness. So I really hope that, so I'm trying to do everything to kind of argue for a different pace, you know, both for myself and the output, and to take care and consider others. And, you know, in this time, one of the things that we were doing as a company is our check-ins. We've always done check-ins as a company, but they've sometimes taken up to an hour and a half at the moment because there's so much to process and people are processing, and to not see that time as wasted time, but as absolutely the work.
And you know, definitely, and I just shout out to people living with a disability that have, you know, said this. You know, it was International Day for People with a Disability, and I was tuning in to 3CR Community Radio, where they've got like a dedicated day for it. And, you know, people were talking about it, and it's like, these are the things that we always talked about. It's a thing that women have always talked about in terms of like work practice. You know, I need to take some time out to look after my kids, my family, you know, all of those quote-unquote vulnerable groups, everything that they've been saying over the years. And it's, you know, and I hope, as you're saying, our relationship with productivity will definitely change. Like I know it's like a race to nowhere. You don't really need it. Like it doesn't mean anything. Like it's, yeah, I know. Yeah.
At the same time, I've never written more grant submissions in this period, because that was what was kind of happening, and it was a real tussle for me between. I don't know if you feel the same way. Like I was really conflicted, because there was some survival and sustainability, and also just this kind of incessant need to do all this stuff.
Yeah, I think in my head, my rational brain was like, screw productivity, but then like my personality it's just like to fill my life with a bazillion activities. So I just still did that anyway, you know.
Yeah.
Like, and then I was like, oh, I've done it again. Like, I've clearly learned nothing. But I think that I think the thing that was really different for me was like, all of a sudden, if I just really wasn't feeling it, I didn't feel guilty about being like, you know what, today I'm going to do nothing. Like, or I can't do that meeting, or I need to reschedule it. And I think pre-COVID, I wouldn't have done that. I would have just forced myself to like show up.
And my children were so much more involved in my work, you know, like, because we were, and I was much more able to say, I can't do this because I have to look after my children. And, you know, we do this really weird thing where we separate and compartmentalise those processes. And I worked in India for a bit, and I walked up on the first day without my children, and they were like, "Where are your family? Where have you come to work without your family?" And it was so countercultural to me to bring them. And so, of course, from then on, I brought, I just had one child at that point, and she was just part of the workplace and integrated, and it was just a really, and I felt like, well, that was having to happen again here. You know, they would come in on, you know, I'd been at a meeting and they'd come in, and that was just how it had to be. And couldn't separate those things as much, and I don't want to. Sometimes I want to, but let's face it. But, you know, I am a mother and a worker, and I can't deny that. I couldn't deny that in this time.
Yep. Which actually I think is probably, for most people with children, was a pretty common experience in a way. I don't know. I don't have children, so I was just like, oh, we just, like, it was sort of like, it was the first time I really noticed a like really difference in my lifestyle to my friends of mine who had kids, because I was like, oh, we do have all this free time to like make sourdough, or like, I don't know, whatever.
No free time. Like. No free time. Negative free time. But then my partner has been making sourdough for 20 years, so he was quite amused by everybody getting on the sourdough bandwagon.
I know. I think I said the same thing to Hope. I was like, when we were talking about it, and I was like, but I've been doing it for years, you know, like, it's very defensive about it.
And it's interesting, the stages of lockdown where you would go and make elaborate meals, and what we've been through in Melbourne, where afterwards it's like, just eat whatever we have, like 10 chickpeas. It was really like this peak of extracurricular cooking activities, and then it was like, I don't care anymore.
And that's one hangover for me. I can't face the meal prep at the moment. I'm just like, I like cooking, but I can't get my cooking mojo back. I'm just like, maybe I have to be pummeled safely in some waves between the flags.
Yes. A mango, or like, you know, fruit, like the oranges and the smiley faces, yeah.
I just thought we've only got like 5-10 minutes left, so I thought like I might open it up if anybody has any questions.
Thanks for the talk. I was wondering, Katie, if you could maybe speak a bit more to your archival.
Yeah, I mean, it's been a pretty, it's been an experience that's changed, or a process that's like been constantly in a state of change. So, yeah, as I said, I'm still sort of collating material. Like, I sort of went through this, I guess, like, the first thing is, like, I'll meet all the people online, and then we'll all meet in person, because it'll be June and July and everything will be open, and I'll be able to just... And so that was, like, the original plan, and then obviously that couldn't happen. And then... so now I've sort of been collating conversations, in, like, I guess, to suit sort of the circumstances, but also, like, however is easiest for whoever is contributing. So some of those things, and some people were just like, we really want to do it. We want to do it right now. We don't have the internet, so we did it over the phone. Hope I met on Zoom. This is actually the first time we've ever met in person, which is pretty exciting. And then Kate came to the Women's Centre maybe like 2 weeks ago.
It was my first outing outside the house.
So and I guess it's in sort of finding people to be in the project. It was just a real combination of like people that I knew. We did an open call out through the Women's Centre, and then I also contacted a group of different sort of women's organisations. So that's how I got in touch with Hope, was through Multicultural Women's Health. Is that right?
Yeah. Multicultural Centre for Women's Health, yeah.
And also then I guess there's just been a bit of a snowball. So like then people will be like, I know this other person, and I've sort of talked to them and so yeah, I'm still currently like collating stories, and yeah, so it'll be a sort of mix. And then also I guess, so there's that material, and then as part of the project I commissioned a textile artist to make masks for all the participants. So which I've got one right here. So yeah, everybody who contributes got one of these masks, and they're made by an artist, Becca Hannah, and she uses recycled material, and they've all been embroidered on the inside with a little sort of insignia for the archive. And, and I guess like for me, I was sort of, I guess the Women's Centre, I guess it came out of like I was doing a lot of work in the Women's Centre archive, and also thinking about, that space was a hospital originally, and so it served the women of Victoria in a very particular way. And I was like, well, we're not a hospital anymore, but we're in the middle of like this giant health crisis. So like, I guess like how can the centre like serve the women of Victoria in a different way? Yeah. Anybody else?
Such a great question. I think there's something, I've been thinking a lot about gathering, and why we gather and why we come together, and how we connect, and what are forms of, and I know that's kind of what I'm thinking about when I'm thinking about the next thing that I make. It's around how we come together, and what that means to come together, and what it means to come together well. And yeah, and I really hope you're right, that we stop doing so much but do less in a really meaningful way. And I think about this kind of local thing that's happened. My neighbourhood is really galvanised, and my street, I know all my neighbours now much better than I knew before. And so I do feel like there's been some really profound gifts of this time. And I also feel like because those cracks have been exposed, I can't look away from them now. And I really hope that we continue to not be able to look away from them, and really try to address some of those deep systematic inequalities, and recalibrate what's important and how we care for ourselves and each other. That's my real hope. And I'm definitely thinking that's at the forefront of my mind all the time at the moment, where it was easier before to look away, perhaps. And I don't want to do that anymore.
I think for me, it boils down to decolonization, but I think nursing is such a hierarchical profession. It's very badly taught in this country, and I think that appreciating, in some ways, I've made more connections. I'm going through the degree, but I work as a personal care assistant or a personal care attendant. And I've looked after people in their homes, in the community. Like, the paid work that I've done has been just as valuable, if not more, in that my scope of practice, what I've been able to do with people, has been a lot wider and a lot better than just on placement in the hospital. And deconstructing healthcare, I think that there's also this misbelief that the only way that you can be a good nurse is like through the hospital. And I think that there's like quite a division between the way that we look at hospital nurses and the way that we look at community nurses. And I think that it's, you know, it's pretty much like hand in glove. But the resources that we put into community nurses and community care is lesser than. And the kind of rhetoric that people have, definitely in the nursing profession, about people in the community nursing side of things is not right. So deconstructing healthcare and deconstructing nursing and getting rid of some of those hierarchies, because a lot of the things that I've seen this year and where I've most been able to look after people and push the alarm bell has been in community. And there's been so many people who've delayed their healthcare and delayed this, that, or the other because they were afraid to go into hospitals. And, you know, people have this idea of nurses being a certain kind of person, but they just, I don't know. If you went into nursing coming straight out of high school, you're younger than me and you don't really have a lot of life experience. Not saying that there's not a lot of good nurses out there, but what is a nurse and what makes a nurse is certainly not the kinds of the people that I've learned from are certainly not the kind of people that I'll be taking advice from and letting look after me. And so we need to deconstruct that. And the doctors too, young bunch of, I don't know, look, I've also turned into a little bit of an old lady. I know I'm just 32, but everybody else is younger and it's all a mess out there. You can't trust any of these people. And so I hope that we can have honest conversations in the future and get more people involved in healthcare, get more people involved in taking charge of their health, because it's not this thing that you need. I mean, yes, you need a degree, and there's some procedures in which you need a degree for, but I hope that people can get more involved in healthcare and we can kick aside some of this, you know, hierarchy that comes with health, because there's some people who know what they're doing, there's some people who don't. And even amongst the people who know what they're doing, like their agenda is a bit different and that sort of thing. So I think that hopefully we can burst the bubble on how we look after each other and who has the right to look after or have the, you know, the biggest call or the main call on this or that, and that, you know, people's health can go back into people's hands, you know, the way that Victorian Aboriginal community-controlled organizations have done healthcare with the very little that they have, and, you know, the way that we understand things. I mean, you look at the US now, it's supposed to be like this beacon of whatever, you know, how many people dying per minute, per hour, and I think that in Australia, what we don't realize is that whilst other countries, you know, Ebola comes around every other year. This is a communicable disease. The other thing that it's taught us, taught me, is that we weren't ready for something that means I should keep my distance away from you. I should let you know if I've been in contact with someone else that's done this or done that. We're not ready for that, but other countries have adapted to it. So Vietnam has done really well. Other countries have done really well, but we're very much like a me, individualistic society. And no matter how much money we have in healthcare, no matter how first world we are, if we don't look after each other, then it's all going to go downhill. And that's what's happened in the US. You don't need, like, even under-resourced countries have done a good job in curbing this virus. You don't need to be like, oh, we're in the first world country, so we're going to be all right. Look how many anti-vaxxers and anti-maskers and dumb people are just out there. Like, you know, it just, and so I hope we can sort of pop that bubble on what it means to be privileged, on what it means to look after each other, and who has that right to say, no, you know, I don't have a degree, but let's just do this the proper way, and this is the science. And I hope we can go back to listening to science and listening to people who've had the correct messages and looking after our environment. Because at the end of the day, I mean, we can blame these people or blame those people. This was a biological thing. Like, I mean, I think antibiotic resistance is another thing that's going to come up and bite us in the butt. I mean, who cares if it's bats or if it's whatever? The way that we're treating the environment is going to come back and kick us in the butt, whether it's a coronavirus-looking sort of thing, whether it's like an antibiotic-resistant sort of thing. And we need to go back to nature, looking after each other and looking after the land. And I hope we can share those messages. And who's in charge of doing that can be on all of us as a community. Yeah.
And I think actually the thing that I think has really come through like almost all the conversations that I've had is this sort of real emphasis on care and like how do we like caring for people, but also like, yeah, how do we care for ourselves, or how do we care for our world and the city and the spaces that we're in, and you know, and like how do we actually, I mean, I've sort of been thinking a lot about like, yeah, how do we actually create a city or a landscape or a place to live that is emphasizes care and empathy rather than I don't know, spending money. You know, and it's like and I think at the moment, if we really want to hang on to that, we need to fight for it. But cool. Well, I think that might be it. So thank you so much to Hope and Kate for coming and speaking, and thanks for everyone for being here.
Thanks for having us.